I want you all to think back to the night of October the 3rd, or the 16th, or the 22nd, whichever night you happened to tune in to the presidential debates of the 2012 presidential election. Now I want you all to try to remember the presidential candidates going into a detailed discussion about infrastructure. Do you remember it? Most likely not, because it didn't happen. The candidates went into very little detail about the further investment in infrastructure. This is because there are so many more important issues than infrastructure that our government needs to resolve. Our government should be concentrating on lowering the national debt and improving our education system and finding more energy sources before we concentrate on infrastructure. Good afternoon, classmates, fellow debaters, judges, and Mr. Redkin. My name is Casey O'Neill, and my partner Gotti Zimmerman and I are here on the negative side to debate Cooper and Eddy over the need for change involving the further investment in transportation infrastructure. Gotti and I have created a keystone philosophy that we believe that will help the United States take a bigger step forward into the future than the affirmative's proposal to better our nation's transportation infrastructure. And that is, learn first, fix second. Gotti and I believe that if our nation focuses more on bettering the education of young Americans, then the United States will be in better shape for the future. In a few years, through education, we could discover a new, better, and less costly way to improve the transportation infrastructure of the United States. My partner Gotti will elaborate more on that later. The affirmative side has proposed the resolution, resolved that the United States federal government should substantially increase its transportation infrastructure investment in the United States. Some of these terms are a little broad, so I will define them for you. Substantial is defined by dictionary.com as of ample or considerable amount, quantity, size, etc. Transportation is defined by everydaydebate.blogspot.com as a means of conveying people or goods from one place to another. Infrastructure is defined as the underlying structure of a system, and investment is defined as the outlay of money given for income or profit. Thus, the definition of a transportation infrastructure investment is the money given for the underlying systems used to provide for the movement of people and or goods. In simpler terms, it is the money, in this case funded by the U.S. federal government, put towards the structure of our nation's transport system. Investments usually require assurance that the money will not be lost and or wasted, and the investment in infrastructure does not assure that. There are many risks when investing in transport infrastructure projects. A published report from O. Porkna and D. Makova, titled "The Risks of Investments in Transport Infrastructure Projects," states that the risks include technology, traffic and revenue, financial, currency, regulatory and legal, and political. These risks far outweigh the benefits that investment in transportation infrastructure will produce. Some risks are more serious than others. For example, the financial and political risks. Financially, the affirmative plan is very risky. The size of the ever-growing U.S. national debt will grow even larger with the startup costs of the project, the funds of the rest of the project, and there's a large possibility that the project will run over budget, so those funds too. This is all a huge risk because the project may not be able to produce returns on the investment. Also, technologically, the affirmative plan is very risky. Technology can either further improve a project or really hurt a project. This usually depends on the sources available. So is the affirmative plan really worth all these risks? The affirmative side will argue the opposite, which is that the pros of the investment in the United States transportation infrastructure will far outweigh the cons. But $476 billion is a heavy con. President Obama has proposed a budget for the 2013 investment in infrastructure. This plan calls for a $476 billion six-year revamp of the United States transportation system with a $50 billion upfront investment. This may not be identical to the affirmative plan, but the cost will most likely be very similar. And that is a huge chunk of money that we are just adding to our ever-growing, massive national debt. The affirmative economic side may also argue that the further investment in infrastructure will produce many jobs in the United States, which may be true, but that is not the only way to create jobs. Moneycrashers.com states that the best ideas regarding job creation are tax cuts, a jobs bill, and funding to state and local governments. Tax cuts would allow companies to keep more of their earnings, which would allow them to hire more employees. A jobs bill would focus on creating jobs in the small business sector, which would make credit more available for small businesses. The funding to state and local governments would allow states to stop raising taxes on residents, which would lower the unemployment rate and alleviate the residents being crushed by taxes. In conclusion, Gotti and I believe that the affirmative resolution is impractical and undesirable because there are too many risks. The huge cost will add to the already massive U.S. national debt. The government should be investing in other programs, and there are other ways to create jobs. Thank you, and please vote no.